Hello and welcome to Carpet City Cinema, a Gila Films podcast. I'm David Weaver, and just coming a day later at you. Had a kind of a busy week, but appreciate you being patient for an extra 24 hours so I could record this episode. Have a little bit of news about the upcoming Blu-ray and DVD releases of our feature film, The Last Frankenstein. We posted this information up on our Facebook page and on our Kickstarter page for the project. Might cover some stuff that I talked about on previous episodes, but I figured I'd dive a little deeper into it since we gave the update to all our backers. It's basically just kind of an outline of what the release plan is going to be for the movie. We are going to start off when the time comes with just a limited edition Blu-ray that will only be available through our distributor's site, and also I'll have some copies to sell locally to our Amsterdam-based Franken fans. We still don't have a street date yet for the title, and I'm not yet at a point where I can divulge information about the distributor itself. But I do just want to kind of give a heads up on this because the standard edition Blu-ray, which might not have all the bells and whistles of the limited edition, and the DVD release, that's not going to come till later down the road after that first limited edition Blu-ray. At least 3 months after it'll be after the limited edition Blu-ray hits that the other releases will come. And we had some people who backed our project at just the DVD level, rewards level, and at the standard edition Blu-ray rewards level. And in the Kickstarter update that I wrote, I let them know that, hey, we don't want you to wait any longer than necessary. You've already waited a really long time. Obviously, everybody has to get to this point. So if you want to just get the limited edition Blu-ray instead, we'll upgrade you to that at no charge. Obviously, there are some people who backed us who only have DVD players. Not everyone's made that jump. And so we told them that's fine, too, if you want to stick with that reward level. But it's just going to take longer before we get that out to you. Why are we doing it this way? Our film, it appeals obviously to horror movie fans, to fans of the the local Amsterdam scene, but kind of one of our big bread and butter demographics is fans of cult cinema, because that's kind of the era and the subgenre that's really influenced our film and really influenced me. I've talked about that before, how my favorite, if there's a slice of the cinematic pie that I would eat first, it's the late 50s to mid 80s, and how much I've been influenced not just by the films of that era, but everything of that era. And similarly minded people are, who like that kind of cinema as well, whether it be horror specifically or just in general films of that era. They tend to be people in terms of buying habits and consuming habits who are less likely to be people who stream, and they prefer to be, have a physical copy of a film that they watch. And when they do own a movie, it tends to be on a Blu-ray or 4K. They tend to be less likely to be DVD players. They're collectors, and they're people who like to get it in the best quality possible. It's different than the mainstream buyer who is okay with just getting the DVD or buying the Blu-ray and then selling it at a garage sale like a month later, or who just wants to have digital copies. And so we have to really kind of speak to that market first, which is what the limited edition Blu-ray will do. And then from there, we can kind of broaden our buying base. So that's kind of why we're doing it that way. But just wanted to kind of touch upon that again. And we'll be reaching out to the Kickstarter backers individually to give them that option. No specifics about the release date other than just sooner rather than later. But that's kind of the biggest update with The Last Frankenstein and Gila Films projects. Some rather unexpected news kind of hit today for fans of physical media, and that is that the UK-based company Network Distributing has ceased operations. This was really out of the blue. This company's been around for something like 25 years, longer than that maybe even. Released DVDs and Blu-rays, and also has streaming options for its titles. Just an incredible plethora of predominantly British product, both television series and feature films. Um, they'd have sales throughout the years that were just great opportunities to pick up their stuff, even when you're importing to the U.S. with the shipping and everything. It still was turned out to be really, really affordable. My girlfriend and I have a number of their titles in our collections, and they were even had pre-orders up just within like the last week or so for the upcoming titles. And then their website went down, and at first people were like, well, maybe that's just, a glitch, or maybe they're just overhauling something. But then we started seeing social media posts from people in the know in the British industry saying that yes, indeed, that they're done. One of the outlets that posted was the Twitter the Twitter feed for the Jerry Anderson Productions, the Jerry Anderson Company. If you're not familiar with Anderson, Jerry Anderson product, that he was the producer of a lot of that marionette-based science fiction shows back in the day, like Thunderbirds and Fireball XL5, and Network had released a number of Jerry Anderson products through on physical media, and they sent out a tweet today. I'll read it. This is from the Jerry Anderson Twitter. We're incredibly sorry to hear that Network Distributing has ceased trading. The company, founded by Tim Beddoes, has made an incredible contribution to making classic shows, including many Jerry Anderson series, accessible to fans all over the world. Their hard work and dedication to releasing beautifully restored and packaged content was unparalleled. Thank you to everyone at Network for your efforts. You will be sorely missed. End quote. And absolutely, this sucks because there are obviously many labels that will tackle British product. There are a number of other great British labels, such as Arrow, Eureka, Indicator, but that kind of special provenance of Network was something that really hadn't been touched as much by other labels. They did a lot of British TV shows that other companies hadn't really dabbled in. They did a lot of less, not ultra low budget, but lower tier comedies and dramas and genre films that I don't know will be as appealing to other labels. It was kind of their niche. They did high profile films too, critically acclaimed movies, big films. They did some of Hitchcock's early British work. They did a lot of product that was owned by the company ITC that in the U.S. Shout Factories released a lot of those on Blu-ray. But there was just this kind of space they had carved out that I really hope that someone else will kind of take that on. Now, what's going to happen to their products? It's too soon to say. Obviously, there's not going to be anything new coming out, but I'm sure that before their website went down, they obviously had a significant inventory on hand. Now, some of that stuff you can still buy through like Amazon UK, or you might be able to pick it up through some retailers. My understanding is probably what's going to happen is if they're going through any kind of like liquidation kind of process, probably someone's going to come in and just buy out all their assets, and then I would assume make them available again to buy until they sell out. Now, who that will be, and when it will happen, and if it will, because they're UK based, will this reseller, to what extent will they be making this product available worldwide? I don't know the answers to any of those questions. I think it'd be great if someone with kind of a more global reach like Arrow was able to come in and just buy everything, and then you could still just buy it through their website. But yeah, I don't really know. I went over to Amazon UK today and just picked up some of their titles that I still didn't have, that I just was want to make sure I got before they kind of went bye too soon. And a lot of the stuff they put out do have comparable U.S. releases from other companies. For example, they just put out Conga, the early 60s giant ape science fiction horror movie. They just put that out on Blu-ray. But, in the States here, Kino Lorber had put that out on Blu-ray. And that can be said for a lot of their titles. But there are some movies that their releases are it. That's it. For Blu-ray at least. Movies like Seance on a Wet Afternoon, which is one of the ones I ordered today, the critically acclaimed early 60s film with Richard Attenborough and Kim Stanley. They had the only Blu-ray release of the 50s animated adaptation of Animal Farm. They are the only Blu-ray release of the Sean Connery 70s action film Ransom, which is also known as The Terrorists. So there's definitely a number of titles that if you're really a diehard physical media collector, and if you have the ability to play discs from other regions. I would recommend kind of perusing their titles, maybe over at Amazon UK. If you want, you can go over to the website Blu-ray.com, which is a forum, physical media forum, and they have message boards devoted to each labels. And if you go to the one on network distributing, which is also known as network releasing, the front page, the very first page, has images of the cover art of all their Blu-rays, so you can kind of see what they have to offer. If there was one title I would recommend picking up, it would have to absolutely be their Blu-ray release of the 1972 film Miss Leslie's Dolls, and it's really interesting that Network put this movie out because they are such a definitively British label, and really kind of, like I said, tackling this very, these very much more niche British comedies and films noir and TV shows. And Miss Leslie's Dolls is an American movie. It's actually not just an American movie; it's a regional film shot in Florida, 1972 horror movie. So you have this very definitively American type of film being released by this very definitively British label. And the thing about Miss Leslie's Dolls is it was thought to be a lost movie until Network put it out. And they put it out, restored it, put it out on DVD and Blu-ray, the only physical media release I think this film's ever had. And it's a really interesting, bizarre horror film about a teacher and her students who get stranded at this isolated house in the middle of the night out in the wilds. And their host is the Miss Leslie at the title, who is a spinsterish, axe-wielding, spiritualism-obsessed woman who might not be as womanly as she leads people on to believe. And a quick look at the box art and the description of the movie will probably kind of give you an idea of where the film's going. It's a very unusual film for its time, and very worthwhile, recommended watch, especially for fans of regional films and genre films. And again, that's it in terms of release. I'm kind of surprised that a U.S. label hasn't picked this up now that there's a transfer for it, but definitely recommend checking that out. That is like the one title. If I had to pick one, that would be it. So again, hopefully somebody comes in and picks up not only the merchandise that's left over, but also kind of picks up where they left off in terms of the titles they were tackling. Now, in terms of passings of a more human nature, we did lose some people this past week. I just wanted to talk about. The first is Michael Norell, who died age 85. And he had a career both in front of and behind the camera. He started out as an actor and basically really only had one role, but it was one that lasted for a while. And that was on the Jack Webb-produced 70s TV series Emergency, the hit show, which follows the paramedics at a fire station and also the staff at a local hospital. And he played the role of Captain Hank Stanley, who ran the firehouse in the show, where the characters played by regulars Randolph Mantooth and Kevin Teague, or is it Teague, worked. And so he was on the show for the entire run, appeared in 110 episodes, which is close to the entire show, and only had one other acting credit. He guest starred in an episode of Police Story. But while he was on Emergency, which is a show I'm a big fan of Jack Webb, while he was on Emergency, he also wrote 4 episodes of the series, and that led to a whole new career as a television writer. And he did just work on the small screen in the writing part of his career, but penned episodes for a number of popular shows over the decades. He wrote for episodes of Nash Bridges, of the Magnificent Seven TV show, of The Love Boat. He also wrote a number of TV movies, including Sex and the Married Woman, which Jack Arnold directed. He wrote the reunion TV movie I Spy Returns, which brought back Robert Culp and Bill Cosby from the hit TV show. And then he and his brother, James Norell, they wrote the 1990 critically acclaimed TV movie The Incident, starring Walter Matthau. And that actually earned them an Emmy nomination, the only one for Michael Norell. And that TV movie was enough of a hit that it spawned 2 sequels, and they also wrote the first of those 2 sequels. But yeah, Emergency is a show definitely dear to my heart. I love Jack Webb's product, Dragnet, Adam 12, Emergency. He has such a incredibly singularly unique personal aesthetic to his work. It doesn't matter whether it's the feature films he made or the TV shows, and even if regardless of whether or not he was in the TV shows or just producing them, also extends to the Dragnet radio series, old time radio show, which I've listened to quite a bit of. But he just whatever the project is, if he's behind it, it all speaks with one voice. It doesn't matter who the is directing the episode or who the guest star is. The just the leanness of the product, the tightness of the construction, the very distinct acting and writing style, which really speaks to Jack Webb's voice. It's just incredible how he was able to permeate all his work with just that singular voice of his, which is so unique and which I just really find entertaining. So it was definitely kind of sad on a personal level to see that Michael Norrell had passed. We also lost filmmaker Kenneth Anger, age 96. Anger was a renowned experimental avant-garde filmmaker. Directed a number of short films that have gone on to become classics within the avant-garde world. Films such as Lucifer Rising, Scorpio Rising, Invocation of My Demon Brother, Fireworks. I saw some of these actually in film school. They screened them in one of our classes, and definitely made an impression on me. In fact, I was just curious if they ever put these out on Blu-ray. I knew there were some DVDs. I think they might have been out of print, and I guess the BFI, British Film Institute, put a collection of his works out on Blu-ray. It's out of print now, but I just was able to find a copy from a reseller and snag that. So I'm really looking forward to checking those out again. He's also known for writing the Hollywood Babylon books, Hollywood Babylon and Hollywood Babylon 2, which were very popular, kind of controversial when they came out. Not always factually accurate. They basically retold a bunch of very salacious stories of old Hollywood about Jane Mansfield's death, and it was a lot about death, a lot of the murders and unseemly deaths of many people in the Hollywood scene. My grandfather was a big fan of reading those books. In fact, I think he lost his copy at one point of the first one. So I for Christmas or birthday or something, I tracked down copies of both books and gave them to him. So kind of on a personal note too, because I was very close to my grandfather to see that he had passed away. Ed Ames. Ed Ames has also left us just recently, the singer and actor who was with his three brothers, a member of the Ames Brothers Quartet, which is a popular musical act. And then Ames also found some success singing as a solo act. He was 95 years old. And people also remember him from the TV show Daniel Boone with Fess Parker, because he played Bingo, Daniel Boone's Cherokee friend. I actually saw him recently in an episode of McCloud not too long ago, alongside Claude Akins and John Denver and Patrick Wayne. That was a guest cast to be reckoned with for sure. And then cult movie icon Gary Kent also left us recently, age 89. He was a jack of many talents, but he's probably best known for working as either an actor and most predominantly working as a stuntman. That's the top. If you were to rank the different positions he held, which one he's best remembered for is his work as both a stunt performer and a stunt coordinator. And he'd been in the industry since the late 50s, that far back. Did a number of films with Al Adamson. In fact, he was interviewed in the documentary that David Gregory of Seven Films made, Blood and Flesh, The Real Life and Ghastly Death of Al Adamson. And he did stunt work of some sort on such Adamson movies as Hell's Bloody Devils, Satan's Sadists. He also appeared in Dracula vs. Frankenstein and Angel's Wild Women. He worked on Lost, which was Adamson's last completed film, which starred Sandra Dee. He also did stunt work on films ranging from Richard Rush's biker movie Hell's Angels on Wheels and his cult classic Freebie and the Bean with James Caan and Alan Arkin to movies like The Incredible Two-Headed Transplant. And even in later years, he worked on Bubba Hotep. And he made appearances in films, like I said, like Ray Dennis Steckler's The Thrill Killers, Peter Bogdanovich's Targets, which he also did some of the special effects works for, movies like Schoolgirls in Chains and The Forest. Even directed a few films, The Pyramid, Rainy Day Friends, and Secret Places, Secret Things. Those were the three features he directed. And he had built such a reputation, they actually made a documentary about him about 5 years ago called Danger God. So, yeah, was one of those guys who had his hands everywhere back, especially in the 60s and 70s. That was kind of like the most busiest time, it seemed, and most recognizable time in terms of the work he was doing was during that era, and especially in exploitation cinema. So a very familiar name to fans of cult and drive-in movies. And lastly, we of course cannot forget to mention the passing of the one and only George Maharis, age 94, probably best remembered as one of the two stars of the hit 60s show Route 66, which had he and Martin Milner traveling across the country, encountering different interesting characters, finding themselves in different plights. The show ran for 4 seasons, but partway through the third season, Maharis stopped appearing in episodes and eventually left the show altogether. There was basically a string of episodes where Milner's character was by himself, and then Maharis's character came back for like one episode, then he was gone again, and then they just introduced a new character played by actor Glenn Corbett to finish off the third season as Martin Milner's traveling companion, and then to be with him throughout the fourth season. And Maharis claimed it was just because of health problems that he had been diagnosed with hepatitis, that the shooting schedule on the show was just really grueling. They filmed on location all across America, because they really want to get the actual feeling of traveling across Route 66. And Harris said that he had asked the producers if they could just kind of ease off on the shooting schedule a bit, and they declined that, and so he just left the show, and it never really reclaimed its popularity levels after Harris was gone. It did, so they canceled it after one full season with Milner and Corbett. He did try to make a transition to being leading man in feature films. He had already appeared in some movies prior to this. Most notably, he had a supporting role in the Paul Newman film Exodus. But after his run on Route 66, he just wasn't really able to establish himself. I mean, he did appear in films like Sylvia opposite Carol Baker, the comedy Quick Before It Melts with Robert Morse. Probably his most notable film role is the lead in The Satan Bug, which is an Alistair MacLean-based suspense film from 1965 directed by the great John Sturges and starring Anne Francis, Richard Basehart, and Dana Andrews. And that was probably his biggest chance at stardom, the closest he came to that. And after that, he showed up in films like The Happening with Anthony Quinn, A Covenant with Death, the Telly Savalas Western Land Raiders, but really just kind of went over to television and just did lots of guest shots on TV shows and appeared in TV movies. I've seen him in stuff like McMillan and Wife, and he's in one of my favorite episodes of the short-lived show, The Snoop Sisters, the one that my girlfriend and I watch at Halloween with its dealings with witchcraft and whatnot. Also, like I said, TV movies, fun ones like Murder on Flight 502 and SST Death Flight. Those are a lot of fun to watch. Cult film fans will recognize him from one of his later rare feature film roles in the 1982 film The Sword and the Sorcerer. But he just passed away, age 94. Did get one Emmy nomination for his work on Route 66. And if you ever get a chance, I would highly recommend checking out the one of the Route 66 episodes in particular. It's the 1962 Halloween episode that they did titled Lizard's Leg and Owlet's Wing. And in this episode, our two leads, Martin Milner and George Maharis, are near Chicago, and they get a job working at a motel as kind of like as liaisons. And while, of course, George Maharis, he finds himself dealing with a group of, I believe it's secretaries, executive secretaries, and of course finds himself pining away for one of them in particular, a very lovely secretary played by Janine Riley of Petticoat Junction. Martin Milner, he finds himself having to handle the episode's three major and very spooky guest stars: Peter Lorre, Boris Karloff, and Lon Chaney Jr., who appear in the episode as themselves. And they're trying to chart a path forward in their horror careers, trying to figure their way around the changes in the horror genre that they're aware of. And it's a really fun episode because those horror titans, they really play on their reputations and their legacies that went before them. You even get to see Karloff and Frankenstein monster makeup. And the cool thing about this episode is that Retro Media, the physical media label that Fred Olen Ray, cult filmmaker Fred Olen Ray, has started, he actually, through that label, put out this episode on Blu-ray because otherwise you'd have to watch it as part of. You could get the complete series from Shout Factory, but people might not want to make that full investment, but still want to see this episode, which is one of the more popular, especially if you're a horror fan. So you can pick up that Blu-ray for like $15, and he also includes as bonus features on it. There's like some other television material that some of those horror stars were in. Like there's an episode of I forget, it was Suspense or Lights Out, one of those older shows with Bela Lugosi. Actually, even though he's not in the episode, he got an episode from those old anthology shows based on Edgar Allan Poe's Cask of Amontillado short story with Lugosi in it to put in as a bonus feature. But yeah, sorry to see George go. George Maharis, rest in peace. But definitely check out, even if you don't think you'd be a diehard fan of the show 66, I definitely recommend checking out that Halloween episode. So, on to new announcements, new title announcements that came up. One that just recently came up in the last few days is Scream Factory announced that they are going to be putting out a collector's edition of the 1978 suspense film Coma. This movie was written by the great Michael Crichton, who definitely was a Renaissance man for sure. I mean, just look at this guy's career. He was a doctor, he was a best-selling author, filmmaker behind several hit movies, gave us the show ER. Yeah, just incredible career he had. And Coma is one of, along with Westworld, are my two favorite of his cinematic works. I mean, like those two movies. Westworld is like amazing. I mean, I love that film. I love the execution of it. I love the atmosphere of it. The music score is great. Just the use of Yul Brynner in that movie. Just the way they realized that actual theme park and how they actually modeled like the idea of the Westworld and Roman world and medieval world theme parks around like what you would see, kind of like the construction and layout of an actual theme park. Just a great film, just from beginning to end. And Coma is also right up there. Not based on a Crichton story; it's actually based on a novel by Robin Cook, who's kind of like one of the other medical thriller writers of this time. Yeah, he also later wrote Outbreak, which was made into a film. But most people are familiar with the plot behind Coma. Genevieve Bujold, she's going out with Michael Douglas. They're both like doctors at this big hospital, and Bujold notices that some of the patients are inexplicably going into comas, and then they're just kind of like their bodies are being taken away and disappearing, and which of course she uncovers this very sinister plot involving organ harvesting, and she has to kind of find out who's behind it while she's being targeted. And just incredibly well shot movie, very suspenseful, very very tightly made. I really love just like. I mean, I haven't seen a lot of Crichton's 80s work. He didn't direct a lot of movies after Coma. He did Looker with Albert Finney, which is kind of it's an interesting film, but a flawed movie. And then he followed that up with Runaway and Physical Evidence, which I haven't seen either of those, but they really didn't make a big impression. And so that was kind of like the end of his career as a film director. But just like I said, just Coma and Westworld alone, if that's all he ever did, it would just be a real testament to his incredible skills as a filmmaker. I mean, he really, really was good at it. And this had been out on Blu-ray before by Warner Brothers, but it's a pretty old Blu-ray, so hopefully they can get a new transfer for the collector's edition and get some pretty solid extras on it. Really looking forward to this, though. That was definitely pretty exciting to see that happen. And the other newly announced, and actually it's already out, title I wanted to touch on came from Vinegar Syndrome. They just had their halfway to Black Friday sale, and there was a couple mystery titles that they weren't going to announce until the sale actually started over this past weekend. And one of them was one I was definitely not expecting, and that was from 1983, Boggy Creek 2, and the Legend Continues, which also sometimes goes by the name The Barbaric Beast of Boggy Creek Part 2. Many people who are fans of cult cinema will know this from being viciously, mercilessly riffed by Mystery Science Theater 3000. But so to go back in the Boggy Creek, the history of Boggy Creek, The Legend of Boggy Creek was a 1972 docudrama style film directed by Charles B. Pierce, which purported to tell the story of the Falk Monster, a kind of Bigfoot-like Sasquatch-like creature that supposedly lived in the Texarkana area. It was a huge hit, a massive financial hit, and was played a key part in the whole that whole outburst of these types of docudramas and documentary films and documentary like TV shows throughout the 70s. You had all these product out at that time, dealing with things like the Bermuda Triangle and UFOs and psychic powers. And this wasn't the first foray in that decade into this type of material. It had been preceded by Trace of the Gods in 1970. Um, the actually, believe it or not, Academy Award nominated documentary got the Best Documentary Oscar nomination. Um, the adaptation of the Eric von Daniken book, which was about the idea of ancient astronauts coming to Earth. But the Legend of Boggy Creek was still instrumental in paving the way for this whole decade's worth of documentaries, docudramas dealing with the unknown. Of course, In Search of the Leonard Nimoy Show comes to mind as one of the really great examples of that, as well as all those documentaries made by Sun Classics. Pictures like the Bermuda Triangle and Bigfoot, the mysterious monster. I love all this stuff. I love this. I love these films, and it kind of sucks because a lot of them haven't made it. Well, like to Blu-ray, practically none of them have made it. Yeah, The Legend of Boggy Creek finally did get a Blu-ray release, and Trace of the Gods actually did not too long ago. But a lot of this stuff has not even on DVD. It's just you have to track down VHS tapes of it and whatnot. So 1972, that was when that came out, and the film. Now the rights to the film, even though Charles B. Pierce directed it, the rights to the film belonged to the producers who had financed it, and they, without Pierce's involvement, made a second Boggy Creek film in 1977 called Return to Boggy Creek. That has never been released since VHS era, but the reason, of course, that this film, even though the one that Vinegar Syndrome put out, Boggy Creek 2 and The Legend Continues, the reason, of course, it has the 2 in the title, even though it's the third film, is because Pierce wasn't involved with that middle one. So he considered this his follow-up. The first film, the 1972 film, like I said, it took kind of like a documentary kind of style approach with reenactments and narration. The 80s film tells a actual straightforward narrative where Pierce actually stars in the movie himself, playing a college professor who's taking some students, one of them played by his real life son, Chuck Pierce, into the backcountry to kind of look for this Boggy Creek monster. So, like I said, this was destroyed savagely by Mystery Science Theater 3000. I knew that the company that owns this movie now, Multicom, that they had done a restoration of it, but I kind of just assumed that was just going to be for streaming because that's what Multicom does. Although they do license out a lot of their titles for physical media release to other companies, they do also do a lot of streaming. So when this came out as being announced as actually coming to Blu-ray from Vinegar Syndrome, that was really exciting. And it's part of their VSA line, which stands for Vinegar Syndrome Archive. And that line of Blu-rays, it's pretty much they just do a limited run of like, I think it's like 1,000 or 2,000 titles. Their website's down right now as they catch up from the sale, so I can't double check all this. But basically they do a limited edition run, and it's pretty much guaranteed that once that sells out, they're not gonna reprint it. And that's kind of like the idea. They kind of put some fine print like we might reprint it, but I don't think they have yet with any of them, and they've put out quite a few of these VSA titles. Another company might come along and relicense it, but they probably won't tackle it again. And yeah, I mean, I'm a huge, and not only am I a huge fan of, well, I mean, I guess this checks off all the boxes. I mean, I love 70s filmmaking. I love regional films. I love these kind of in search of style movies. So obviously, this particular Boggy Creek movie is from the early '80s, but still, it's attached to the lore of the original film that came out in '72. And actually, that was the first DVD I ever owned, was The Legend of Boggy Creek. I had the Hen's Tooth video DVD, and I didn't have a DVD player. My uncle had a DVD player. And so I took it up there. I got the DVD. I took it up there and watched it with him. I remember this was forever ago. This was like 20 years ago. And there really wasn't like a really great copy of this movie to watch. The Hen's Tooth was the best DVD, but it was like, I don't know what it was taken from. If it was like some like higher end tape master or print, it wasn't in the right aspect ratio because that movie was shot in scope and beautifully shot. And you always hoped over the years that something else would come up. There were a couple other DVD releases that came out here and there, but they were also basically all just crappy like VHS stuff. And what happened was that Charles B. Pierce's daughter, Pamela Pierce Barsalou, was eventually able to get the rights to the movie, to her dad's movie. She got in touch with the businessman, I believe his name was Vernon Ledwell, who financed The Legend of Boggy Creek and who owned it. as well as Pierce's follow-up film Bootleggers, starring a pre-Charlie's Angels Jacqueline Smith, and they were able to work it out so that she owns the rights to those two movies now, and so she went forward and did a whole restoration of The Legend of Boggy Creek, took it on a kind of a revival tour across the country, showing it at theaters. I actually went down to see it at an Alamo Draft House, um, the nearest one to me, and she was there doing a Q&A, which is really cool. Got to get my picture taken with her and stuff. Um, and now she's working on putting the film out on 4K UHD. And the original Blu-ray was bare bones. She had invested a lot of money into getting the restoration done. She had partnered with the George Eastman House, and just really needed to kind of recoup her investment. And everyone knew, of course, that there was could be added onto a disc release of this kind of movie. There was a number of people still alive from the movie, of course, commentary tracks, and also she's very active and very on social media, and had posted that she had found a lot of outtakes from the movies, which is pretty cool. So the Blu-ray was bare bones, but for the 4K UHD, they've made a kind of like a making of documentary. There's going to be like a commentary track, and they are going to put a bunch of those outtakes on there. So that's pretty exciting to see. And that's coming, I think, by the end of the year. She hasn't put out a date for that yet. So yeah, I was really psyched to see this. I actually, I bought some stuff during Vinegar Syndrome sale and definitely grabbed this too, just because it's one of those ones, even though it wasn't on sale yet. It's two new releases that have been marked down. It's just one of those movies I've just been waiting for so long. And yeah, definitely excited to see it unriffed, to see how that compares. What I've seen from the riff version, obviously, I would not consider it one of Pierce's stronger works. Not up there with the Legend of Boggy Creek or the Town That Dreaded Sundown or even the Evictors, but yes, I will reserve full judgment until I see an unfiltered, unriffed version of the movie. All right, let's talk about the movie of the week. And this week's film, which was another first-time watch for me, was from 1969, and it's titled Changes. And it stars Kent Lane, an actor named Kent Lane, in his film debut. We'll get a little bit more into his backstory down the road. As a college student, also named Kent, who is in his second year, completed 2 years of college, and decides to drop out because he wants to find himself. He wants to find out who he is and really go on a journey of self-exploration, and also a journey of like exploring the nature of the country and to travel. And this, of course, is set against the backdrop of the late 60s, all the different unrest and turmoil at the time with the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, the Vietnam War and the protests against that, the use of drugs and more mainstream culture. And so in deciding to drop out of college and to kind of take this journey of self-exploration, Kent does this against the wishes of his parents, and much to their concern. And as he begins this journey across the country, he suffers a personal loss, the death of someone close to him. So he goes on this trek and meets a variety of characters, motorists who give him rides. Spends some time with a very young Marcia Strassman, making her film debut, pre-Welcome Back Kotter, who plays a young lady who goes to different locations where youth congregate, such as college campuses and protests, to get their opinions on different topics that she sends back to marketing firms to use to better sell their goods to the youth. And as the film enters its final act, its last third, Kent encounters a woman named Julie, played by Michelle Carey, kind of a free-spirited, live for the moment individual who is a little bit more world-wise, a little bit more experienced in life than Kent is, who's already had a couple marriages. And even though in real life Michelle Carey is actually a year younger than Kent Lane, she seems to be playing and successfully comes across as someone who's a little bit older. And they enter into a relationship which, as it progresses, Julie, who had never planned for this to happen, actually finds herself getting very emotionally involved with Kent and looking for some type of commitment from him. Whereas he is, of course, still going through this process of self exploration and finding out about himself. Now, I I've always found myself drawn to these kind of themes of self actualization, self realization, and it was something that was, of course, explored a lot at this time in film. Um, the Billy Jack movies really, a lot of times I looked at as kind of like action oriented films. They're really that's the whole theme of the movies of those four movies is Billy Jack kind of coming into himself, the main character of those films, played by Tom Laughlin. Uh, Transitioning over the course of these four movies from a peace through violence type of mentality to someone who really does try to, by the last movie, really tries to solve problems through more peaceful, peace-oriented diplomatic means. Vanishing Point, the great, deservedly cult classic early 70s film starring Barry Newman, who plays a one-time police officer traveling across the country. And that film's a little different in that it's less about him changing into someone as it is about who he's become. Like in that film, it's more about the journey of self-awareness and self-actualization is kind of completed, and we see him at the result of that, and we see how that how the journey. There's some flashbacks as to how this journey took place, but we're really kind of at the end of the journey in that movie, and. I just find that this, especially through the lens of the late 60s, early 70s, and what was going on in society at the time, it's something that's always attracted me. And this type of story, this type of narrative, it can get easily dismissed, I think, as kind of a dated product of its time. One of the stories very popular of this era that really heavily deals with these kind of themes is the novel Jonathan Livingston Seagull by Richard Bach. And I think a lot of people, obviously it's a huge hit when it came out, a very successful novel. I think a lot of people look at it now as kind of like just, it's just this byproduct of its era, and it's corny product of the 70s. But I read it a few years ago, and I loved it, and I thought it was extremely relevant, and it very much spoke to my thoughts and feelings about those kind of themes of really finding out who you are and maximizing your potential as an individual, and really living up to finding out what it is you really want to do in your life and who you want to be, and then living up to that and the path you have to take to do that. And although that book may have sprung forth from the era in which it was written, although all the changes, pun intended, in society at the time may have led to that book being written and may have helped that book to become a success. At no time in reading it did I ever feel like, okay, this seems like something that's dated. It seems like something very much of its time that either A, does not have any really relevance or any potency to it now, or B, it does, but it's kind of dressed up in all the accoutrements of its time period, so that it kind of just seems a little out of step with time. Now, if we put these in Joan Crawford terms, and we said that Jonathan Livingston Seagull was the Mildred Pierce of this type of story, this type of narrative about self-actualization, if it was the creme de la creme, then Changes would be the Daisy Kenyon. It would be the uneven, flawed, imperfect, but still worth checking out take on these type of topics and this type of subject matter. There are absolutely times where the film comes across datedly cliched. There's one part in the movie where Kent comes after leaving college. He comes back and spends some time with his girlfriend, Bobby. And in as definitively cheesily late 1960s as possible, there is a slow motion montage of them frolicking through the grass and rolling around and kissing, set to the Joni Mitchell written song Both Sides Now, which couldn't be more on the nose. If you were to say to me, create create for me a 5 second, I'm sorry, create for me a 3 minute short film that would scream it was made by a middle-aged person in the 1960s for the youth market, in the late 1960s youth market, I would just be like, okay, sure, I'll do that for you. And I just cut that scene out of the movie and hand that in and be like, I think this is what you're looking for. Because the director, Hall Bartlett, who we'll get into, he was in his mid 40s at this time. And this was a very important project to him. This was not something he just phoned in or tried to cash in on the youth culture. But there is definitely a degree to which I think there was some disconnect between how he felt an audience, a youth-oriented audience, or even an adult audience might consume this narrative, and how best to actually tell the narrative. And so sometimes that related in some kind of dated presentation. Another example of that in the film is, and basically what amounts to a glorified cameo, despite getting third billing on the poster. Jack Albertson plays Kent's father, and after Kent drops out of college, he has kind of a falling out with his parents, where he, much to their chagrin, tells them about this, and the conversation kind of goes back and forth between Albertson, telling his son, I love you and I want what's best for you, and just kind of concerned for you. And this really kind of like very classic, very cliched generational gap chewing out that he kind of gives to his son. Oh, I know what's going on with you kids doing drugs. You wouldn't know what an honest day's work is if you had to hand it to you. And the thing you guys never think about is you're all out there protesting who's going to run who's going to run the store, who's going to run the world, And Kent then, is responding with lines like, "Oh, you never talk to me. You're always talking at me." And it just kind of reeked of kind of like a poor interpretation of like a scene out of Rebel Without a Cause or something like that, which was what, 15 years before this, that had come out and spoke to some of not so much the self-actualization topics of this of film, but the generational kind of gap issues. But that scene that Kent has with Jack Albertson, it just came across as so datedly stereotypical. It came across as such a reduction of what the generational gap and the difficulties of understanding each other between the different generations actually is. It tried to bring it, condense it down to this very simplistic back and forth, spouting out kind of cliched lines that it kind of made that it took that whole scene and it broke it off from reality. Like you never felt like that. It felt like a movie scene instead of an actual conversation between a father and his son. It was like, there's obviously a great complexity to generational gaps, and especially at this time period with the late 60s as the backdrop. It wasn't just about, it was more than just kids doing drugs and wanting to be hippies. There was, so much going on. The fear of being drafted into a questionable military conflict on the other side of the world. There was, everything that went with the sexual liberation and, impacting decisions about dating and marriage and having kids. And I'm sure there were adults back at that time who did reduce it down to black and white terms, and it was like, you kids, stop being hippies and stop smoking pot, and I'm sure there were. But in this film, which is really trying to tell this story through, Kent's journey, and is really trying to create this detailed portrait of this character going on this voyage of self determination and self actualization. I think that this really would have benefited from having as much nuance as possible, as much realism as possible, complexity as possible to the proceedings. Because any time that you take any situation in this film and you reduce it down to like stereotypes or stereotypical interaction or stereotypical two-dimensional characters, then it just makes his journey seem less real and less of a personal voyage and more just of a collection of movie scenes. Something that you could pull out of any film. Now, Lane himself, obviously, you're with him. he is your window into this film. Um, and I think he's adequate. This is his first film. It could have been worse, but I don't think that he really wasn't up to what this film required in terms of acting abilities. Again, it's not a bad performance, and I think he's someone who does better. He's an actor who does better with less. It's the saying, less is more. When a scene is really kind of calling on him to be more emotional, to be more demonstrative, that's really his weak. That's his weak points. Though that's not something that he really excels at, because he plays it too loud and too large and kind of to the back row. I mean, again, that whole scene where he's having the argument with his father, it's just there's moments in it where his performance is just cheesy and corny. Um, but he does have times in the film where again, where he's just kind of going about more the routine of his life, where he is more effective. Now, truth be told, the director of this film, Hall Bartlett, was his stepfather. Bartlett at the time was married to the famous Hollywood golden age of Hollywood leading lady Rhonda Fleming, who starred in movies like Gunfight at the OK Corral and Hitchcock's Spellbound, and she was Kent Lane's mother from an earlier marriage. And at this point, she was married to Bartlett, and don't want to throw this totally on nepotism that Lane got this role. But perhaps he still had to go through the process of auditioning and stuff like that. But there is it's a fact that he is Bartlett's stepson and was the lead in this film. Now, where the casting excels and succeeds is really with its actresses. The part of Bobby, his girlfriend, was played by an actress named Emanuela Thies. And I wouldn't say that it's an award-winning performance that she gives, and it's relegated to kind of like the first third of the film, but it's effective. She plays kind of like this emotionally fragile young woman, young artist, kind of who seems to be at her own journey of self-realization, but one which is very troubled and very problematic and very insecure. The actual journey itself, and could be perilous. And she does a really good job of communicating that fragility in her character. And she didn't really do a lot of acting. I mean, she did a couple movies. Her last role was just a few years after this. She appeared in Alan Rudolph's horror movie Terror Circus. But I did like what she brought to the film in terms of her emotional sensitivity. Marcia Strassman, like I said, this is her film debut, and sporting a really cute short haircut. As Christine, she plays Christine, this this kind of a collector of information for marketing firms, who doesn't, even though she is of the youth in terms of her age, she doesn't really want to get involved with all the changes going on. She doesn't want to get involved with all these movements and upheavals, because she even says, it's just too much of a hassle. She just wants to do her own thing whenever she feels like it. She feels freedom comes from just her ability to travel across the country and constantly be on the move, and that's what she likes. She doesn't feel the need to become kind of brought into all the protests and activities of the time. And again, she's again, it's an early performance from her, so there are a couple moments where it's a little rough around the edges, but overall she really sells that character. And as someone who's kind of both, she's this attractive, independent person who's not just independent in terms of supporting herself and being by herself, but also independent in terms of being willing to step aside from all the movements at that time and all the turmoil at the time, and kind of proceed forward on her own path and her own existence. But then, above all, you got to give a shout out to Michelle Carey. Coming off of movies like El Dorado, playing this role of Julie in the third act of the film, she does such an incredibly realistic job of bringing to life this essentially more experienced, more worldly wise individual who has both a free spirited nature to her, but also has some miles underneath her feet in terms of the life she's led. It's so believable the way that she projects a person who can both live for the moment, but at the same time, there's a part of her that wouldn't mind settling down, that wouldn't mind having some stability in her life if the right person were to come along and share that moment with her. And that's something that she sees Kent has to offer her. But again, she is also someone who, if that's going to fall apart and that's not going to work out, she can kind of be the party girl, the have fun girl. It's a very well developed, very fully developed character that Carrie completely realizes. The odd thing is, in that third act of the film, is what happens with the character of Kent. And you spend all this time with him for the first 2/3. You're really with him on this voyage and this trip and this journey, and he is kind of your identity. He is you. He's your view into this world. And when you get into the third act where he meets Julie, his character as it's portrayed changes. Again, pun intended, I guess, maybe. But what seems to happen is that as his character meets Julie and becomes kind of stationary now in his life, instead of being on this journey, traveling across the country, finding out things about himself, he kind of not fully, but semi settles down with her. He's like staying at her apartment. She eventually chastises him into getting a job at the local boardwalk. And he just kind of starts to come across as more sulking, more sullen. And to a degree, I'm sure this was intentional, because as we get closer to the film's end, and again, I don't want to reveal spoilers, there does come a key moment where she kind of calls him out, and she basically says to him, and this is a paraphrasing, of course, it's basically along the lines of, you're looking for all these answers in life about who you are and what you want to do, and the answers are inside you. You don't need to look anywhere but inside you. But if you don't figure this out, if you don't figure out how to take what's inside you and give of it to yourself and really implement the answers that lie within, then you're not going to be any good to anyone. So my question watching the film was, in this third act, and all the time preceding this moment, this conversation, this calling out that she has with Kent, was this more sullen behavior on the part of Kent? Was that deliberate on behalf of the actor, the filmmakers, to show the effects of him kind of settling down, kind of becoming stagnant, that would have on his personality, that he would go from someone who is on this journey of self-realization and understanding and trying to better himself, and that by coming to a standstill on his journey without really any plan, by basically settling down with Julie without really any forward thought as to how that would fit into this personal journey he's going on, that it's basically been bad for him. Not because of Julie or anything about her, but just because this isn't where he should be right now. This isn't what he set out to do. Was that intentional on the part of the filmmakers to show that change in his behavior in the prior 25 minutes? Or did the actor and the director look at this more as consistent behavior? Did they not see him as being more sullen and being more irritable? Did they see this as just him as Kent still being Kent, and Julie's character perhaps partially, not fully, misreading him and what's going on with him? Because there seemed to be some doubt from my watching the film. There seemed to be some doubt within the POV of the film itself. There seemed to be some doubt within the viewpoint of the film and its narrative as to how accurate Julie's assessment of him was in calling him out. Because it's really important that she calls him out in that scene. It's near the end of the film, and it leads to important decisions, which basically set the stage for the film's climax. And it didn't really fully satisfy me, the way it was presented, as to where the filmmaker himself, where his viewpoint was on the matter of Julie's calling out. How much of it did he agree with? And the thing that kind of makes it problematic is, like I said, this change in his behavior, this change in Kent's behavior runs not just throughout that one scene of him being called out or the 5 minutes prior, it's really throughout that last third of the film. So you go through the entire movie, the first 2 thirds, like I said, this is your eyes into the world of changes. This is Kent. This is the person you're with. And it's not necessarily that you're in the bleachers going rah 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 Kent and you want to see him succeed, but he is who you're going on the journey with. He's who you're attached to, and you don't have a problem with that. You can relate to him wanting to find out more about himself. You can relate to what it must be like to go into your early 20s with discord with your parents and the whole world's in upheaval. And so that's who you're traveling with in the film. But then when you get to that last third and his behavior changes and you're not fully aware why or how intentional this is on the behalf of the people who are telling the story. And the change in the behavior does not come across as a positive one, at least not to me. And as this is happening, you're being presented with this new character, Julie, who is so grounded and so realistic and so nuanced and so complex and so excellently portrayed. You shift. I did. You shift. I went from journeying with Kent to journeying with Julie just like that. Because it just felt like she was now, it felt like we were meeting someone who's also on a journey that was different in nature. She was someone who could, unlike Kent, who was constantly trying to move forward, to find out more about himself, to learn about himself, to see the country. Julie is someone who is self-aware and already has a lot of the answers about her identity. As she says herself, it's all within her. And she's someone also who's willing to switch back and forth between forward movement. If she meets the right guy, she'll settle down with him. She's willing to have stability in a family, but she can also transition to this kind of like for the moment personality. And she's in that sense a very realistic, very fully formed person. And you, like I said, you immediately just want to kind of be with her and kind of start seeing the film through her eyes because, like I said, Kent Lane's performance is not exactly, top tier, and now he's behavior is changing into that of someone who you really wouldn't want to be around, and you're given an alternative. You're given the alternative to kind of identify the narrative now through this new character who just seems so fully embodied. And I think that my takeaway is that I think that the filmmakers did intend for Kent's behavior to be of a negative. In that third act, I think they did intend for these changes in behavior on his part. They did want those changes in behavior to be perceived by the audience and to be perceived as negative and to be perceived as resulting from him losing his way in his journey. And that it's Julie, in calling him out, in questioning, what are you doing? The answers are inside of you. That kind of gets him back on the right track. But even though that's the filmmaker's intentions, what happened was they did such an incredible job at creating this fully realized character of Julie and handed it to an actress who is incredibly dynamic and realistic in bringing that character to life, that when she's placed in this third act alongside a much less able actor playing a character whose behavior is now much more off-putting, that she just completely overwhelms him. And she becomes the character unintentionally that you now identify with, to the detriment of the bond between the audience and Kent's character. And you don't get that back. I didn't get that back by the time the film ended. By the time the film ended, it wasn't like a moment, even at the end, where I was like, okay, I'm back with Kent now. It was gone, and it never retained itself. I was like, well, can I just see more of this movie about Julie? Can we just have more about Julie? It's interesting because it's interesting because it's a flaw in making a movie that's also a strength at the same time, because as much as it harms the audience's relationship with the protagonist, It's only happening because you've done such a good job at creating this other character and done such a good job at casting it, and that actress has done such a good job at portraying it. It's, I guess, it's a pitfall, I would say, of casting an actor who isn't really where they need to be in terms of skill level. If you surround them with other actors and actresses who are, 5%, 10% better or worse, you might be able to get by with it. But then when and I should say in this case, in the case of Changes, it's not so much an issue that he's surrounded by actors who are in his league, as much as the fact is that he spends a lot of the film just traveling and having brief scenes with different people, motorists who pick him up and whatnot, so that you never really have him side by side with other actors and actresses a lot. But yeah, if you put that type of actor, not as experienced, not as capable, into a film where they're surrounded by much, much better performers, then it just calls out even more attention to their weaknesses. And again, not trying to throw Kent Lane under the bus. It's his first film. It's not a bad performance, but it's just not the performance also that was really needed for this main character, especially in that third act, where you're not in an actual conflict way, but you're going toe to toe with Michelle Carey, who completely knows how to sell this person she's playing. Now, aesthetically, the movie does have some nice touches in it, visually, shot in scope, and there are definitely moments where it does a good job of taking advantage of that wider angle to develop some really nice compositions. There's a scene where Kent's in a park watching two young people, a boy and a girl, be romantically playful, and it takes him back to his own relationship with Bobby. And he's watching them while he's hanging upside down from like these monkey bars, jungle gym kind of thing, and just some nice framing in that. Also, there's a scene that has a friend of Kent's that he's going to visit after he leaves school. He goes to see him at like a dirt bike motorcycle track, and so we see some footage of this guy riding his bike around the track. And again, just good use of the scope, the wider angle compositions. The film was shot by Richard Moore, who had been the cinematographer on a number of Paul Newman movies. Well, actually, was going to be the cinematographer in a number of Paul Newman movies because that was after this. Prior to shooting Changes, he had done some B movies. He did a couple biker movies like Devil's Angels and Roger Corman's The Wild Angels, but he had also worked on stuff like the Burt Lancaster Western, The Scalp Hunters, and the Oscar-nominated documentary Young Americans. It was really after the film, after Changes, that you see his career kind of take on a higher profile. He lensed a number of Paul Newman movies, including Sometimes a Great Notion, which Newman directed, and The Life of Times of Judge Roy Bean, which was directed by John Huston. He also was the DP on John Huston's Annie. He shot The Stone Killer with Charles Bronson, Myra Breckenridge, The Reavers with Steve McQueen. So had a lot of really good high-profile titles under his belt before he ended his career. Editing wise, the movie runs about an hour and a half, and that last third where Kent's with Julie is very compact. It's the most classically narrative of structured. It's the most classically narratively structured part of the whole film. In the first 2/3 of the film, there's a lot of more non-dramatically driven or narratively driven segments where it's Kent just traveling across the country, perhaps set to a song, or there'll be more intercutting between two different things going on, such as Kent having this argument with his father, and then footage of youth protests, or Kent flashing back in his mind to moments with his girlfriend. There are times where that kind of stuff. There are moments where that kind of footage might go on too long, and where it can be could have been more judiciously trimmed. For example, what I mentioned before about the motorcycle riding scene where this guy's just going around this dirt track. It goes on a little bit too long, just shots the guy on the dirt track. There's a scene where Kent picks up an opportunity to be in like a demolition derby, supposedly, I'm guessing, to win some money, and that kind of plays a little bit too long. There was the scene I mentioned earlier about the very cornerly late 60s scene of him rolling through the grass with his girlfriend to the wonderful tunes penned by Joni Mitchell. Now, to me, some of those moments could have easily been trimmed. And I think if you had taken that approach throughout the whole film, you could have probably shaved 10 minutes off this movie. Leaves you with 82 minutes, 80 minutes. That's not bad. But here's where it gets interesting. I think that there was a lot more subplots, in the way of subplots in this movie, and a more traditional narrative in this movie than what we ended up with. And there's a few reasons I think that. One of the key reasons is that the end titles of the movie play over still images, and it interchanges between images from history, like pictures of Hitler and Stalin, and images from the film itself. And some of those images taken from the film are from scenes that we never saw. For example, one of the still images underneath the credits is of what appears to be Kent engaged in some kind of fist fight or physical fight with a biker. And I went onto eBay, I was Googling, I was looking up what they had in the way of promotional materials for this film, and they had some lobby card stills from this movie, and sure enough, there was a color still showing a scene of Kent getting in a fight with a biker. So, of course, the question, well, what happened to that scene? Where'd that scene go? Then there's a brief scene in the movie, a very short scene, where we see Kent with his college roommate. And the college roommate is ghostwriting a letter to Kent's parents on his behalf. And the actor playing his roommate is billed as Tom Fielding. Now, Tom Fielding, all the horror film fans know, was the name used by Tom Holland when he started out his career as an actor. And under the name Tom Holland, later on, as he left acting behind, of course, he became very well known to genre fans for writing the screenplays to Psycho 2 and Cloak and Dagger, and then directing to the best-loved 80s horror movies, Fright Night and Child's Play. And although he appears in, literally, I don't think he's even in a minute of the film. I think he's in, 2 shots, a medium and a close-up. In the end credits of the film, he is given his own, completely to himself, title card, introducing Tom Fielding. Which just makes me wonder, was he originally in more of this film? Because the other thing in that scene where Kent's interacting with Tom Fielding, his roommate, the scene ends with Lane being kind of dejected, and he goes into another room, and he starts carving on this, walking stick. And there's another promotional still I saw on eBay from the movie. I think I saw it on eBay, or maybe it was on Google Images, of Kent Lane looking at this statue that looked very, not like a classically made statue of in a museum or something like that, but it looked like it could be the same type of artwork that Kent was doing when he was carving his walking stick. And so it just made me think, was there more scenes of Kent and his roommate? Was there more scenes of him on college campus? We know his girlfriend is a painter. Was he involved somehow in the arts originally? Another thing that kind of stands out to me, just indicating there was more to this, other things in this movie, is Norman Alden is in this film. Norman Alden, not a household name, but a very, very prolific character actor. Just Google him. It's one of those instantly recognizable faces. And by this time, he'd already been acting 15 or so years. He's in the film for even less time than Tom Holland, and in a really confusing context as well. So when Julie initially meets Kent, it's at this boardwalk at nighttime, and they spend the night hanging out, getting some drinks and eating kind of candy and all this fun stuff. And they come back to her apartment house in her car, in her convertible, and she leaves it parked out front of her house. And so then we go to the next morning, and she's up and going about morning business, and her one of the fellow tenants in the apartment house comes and is talking to her, and Ken's still kind of in bed, half awake, and Julie asks this other tenant, "Did the Greek bring my car back?" And this other tenant says, "Yeah, he's waiting for you outside." So she goes out, looks out this window, and there's Norman Alden, and apparently he's brought her car back, and he literally has like two shots. It's like a medium close up and then a close up, and all he basically says is like calls her name, is like says, "We got to talk, Julie. We got to talk." And he's playing this Greek character, and she basically blows him off, tells him to go home. And then when we go back inside, we cut from there back inside her apartment. She says something along the lines of, "When is that guy going to learn that, I say when I'm done, or when I've moved on, I've moved on." Um, so it's very kind of intriguing and mysterious, this whole scene, because it's really odd that if that was intended all along to be how that scene would have played out, that you would cast someone like Norman Alden in that role. He's not, again, not a movie star or anything like that, but he's also more than just a walk-on player. And obviously you're aware of his gifts as a character actor, which is his striking features, his physical presence, and you're aware of the fact that he's been in the biz for a while because you're giving him a close-up, like it's a deliberate close-up. But at the same time, why is he bringing her car back? Her car was there the night before. We see her leave her car outside her house. Her car is there, and the next morning she's talking as if someone took her car, like a mechanic or somebody, and then brought it back. So you just put all that together, that this kind of jump in continuity about where the car was, and the fact that they cast Norman Alden in this role as this Greek, presumably mechanic, and gave him this nice close-up. But that's all they did with him. They didn't do anything else with him. But at the end of the film, like I said, they have stills from the movie playing underneath the end credits. One of the stills is a close-up of him, and it doesn't look exactly like the ones we saw in the film. It looks like maybe it's taken from another scene or another setup. So this all just makes me wonder, was there more Norman Alden in the film? So all this goes to say that, and obviously every film starts out longer. Pretty much every film starts out longer than the final product, and there's often, it's obviously very normal for subplots to be cut out and to be, actors to be deleted from a movie. But I just think when you, in light of the fact that the last of the movie is so much more conventionally narrative, and the first two-thirds are a bit more abstract in terms of the way they're presented. Was there originally a plan for the first two-thirds to be more narratively conventional? Was there originally scenes that they intended to have be in that movie, and then they, for whatever reason, cut those scenes and then found themselves with a movie that was maybe a little shorter than they wanted? So that's why footage of boyfriends and girlfriends rolling around the grass, and of guys driving around on motor tracks and of demolition derbies. Is that why those scenes became a little longer than they needed to be, because they just wanted to beef up the running time? I don't know. It's interesting. It's very noticeable. From a audio point of view, this film has a really great thing going for its aesthetic, and that's that it has a whole bunch of songs by Tim Buckley on the soundtrack. On a personal note, Buckley spent his formative years, his very young years, single digits years, growing up in Amsterdam, New York, where I'm from. And a number of his songs play throughout the soundtrack. It's even featured on the poster after saying starring Kent Lee, Michelle Carey, Jack Albertson. It then goes to songs by Tim Buckley. And really great songs to get featured. This Morning Glory, which is an excellent song, and that plays over a whole montage of Kent traveling, including some scenes of him hitchhiking with a motorist played by a young Kenneth Washington, who would go on to star in the last season of Hogan's Heroes. And then another song that I really like that pops up in the film, and in a really good moment, really good use of it as well, is Once I Was, which they really do a great job of using to kind of portray aspects of Kent's relationship with Julie. It's interesting too, because there's a copy of this on YouTube. This film's hard to watch. It's hard to come by. It was released on VHS. Then it got a DVD release from Code Red, which is out of print and very expensive to come by. There's only like one copy on eBay, and it's like $100. I was fortunate enough to get it when it was much more reasonably priced. But someone uploaded the film to YouTube. I think they just ripped the DVD, but unfortunately, it's a really low res quality copy. But also to avoid copyright strikes, they muted parts of the film where the songs play, and that includes the songs I just mentioned. And it's just interesting to see how, when watching those scenes without the music, it's just it really impresses on you just how much just having the right song, even if it's not regardless of whether it's a song written originally for the film, how much that can benefit a scene in a film, because those scenes don't really carry any weight without Tim Buckley's songs playing on them, not nearly as much. And you just add his songs to those parts in the film where they play, and it just really, really strengthens those moments and really sells them. So it was really good use of his talents to have those songs in this film. Now the title song, Changes, which is sung in the film by Kim Weston, less said about that one the better. It was a little grating on the ears, I ain't gonna lie. But hey, it's okay. We got the Tim Buckley stuff. Definitely keep an eye out, though, when you're watching the movie for a couple other people pop up in the cast. Terry Garr has a really brief moment in the movie early in her career. She plays a waitress at like a hamburger stand. And I was like, wait, is that she? And then she's gone. I'm like, oh yeah, that was Terry Garr. And Cindy Mitchum, who was at the time married to Robert Mitchum's son, Christopher Mitchum. She's got a small part in the film. Hall Bartlett, the director, though, like I said, he was married to Rhonda Fleming at the time. And he's a kind of an interesting career. He's kind of like not a poor man Stanley Kramer, but a lower budgeted Stanley Kramer. Stanley Kramer being the very socially conscious film producer who then added directing to his resume, made films like The Defiant Ones, which dealt with racism, On the Beach dealt with nuclear warfare, Judgment at Nuremberg with the Holocaust, even produced High Noon, which is really an allegory for the communist witch hunts. And, he would produce stuff and then distribute it through studios like Columbia and United Artists. And Hall Bartlett, very much the same. He would produce movies through his production company, Hall Bartlett Productions, and then distribute it through companies like United Artists. He also distributed through Columbia Pictures. Changes was distributed through Cinerama. But he, in his filmography, would also have socially conscious movies. He did a film called The Caretakers with Joan Crawford about the treatment of the mentally ill. He did All the Young Men, which is a Korean War film with Sidney Poitier and Alan Ladd, which touches upon racism very strongly in its plot. And this topic of self-actualization must have really interested him, because he would go on to direct the film adaptation of Jonathan Livingston Seagull in the 70s. Now, Changes itself, he was developing the film as early as 67. And among the things he did to prep for it was he surveyed teenagers around the country. And I guess, because some of this information is coming from the wonderful AFI catalog, it says that, quote, he, quote, eventually formed a committee of around 30 people to advise him on the script, end quote. And then there was a piece in the LA Times which said his advisors, quote, described his advisors as, quote, a strange, disparate group ranging from squares to acid heads by way of pre-med students, the common law wife of a pop singer and the daughter of a call girl, end quote. The film that was actually finished by beginning of 68, and then was distributed by Cinerama in 69. Definitely recommend checking out, and I'll try to post a link to it later this week on our Facebook page. You can find an interview that Hall Bartlett, Kent Lane, and Rhonda Fleming all participated in to promote the film at the time of its release. And in it, Fleming states that the film was the most fulfilling experience she had had. Now, she's not credited in the film at all in any capacity, but it kind of just makes me wonder what her role was in the film, if it was just kind of a supporter on set, or is she more actively involved in producing the movie. But interesting, though, just to see them together, the three of them together, promoting the film. Now, Kent Lane, his acting career would be brief. He would star in a 1971 film that Hall Bartlett also directed called The Sandpit Generals. Did a couple TV appearances. His last acting role, was 1978 in the Burt Reynolds movie Hooper. Still with us as far as I know, but his acting career was briefly limited to that time period. Bartlett with divorce. He and Rutland Fleming would be divorced in 1972. Um, and he would continue to direct, though. Like I said, Jonathan Livingston Seagull. Um, he directed a movie with Anthony Quinn called The Children of Sanchez. That would be his last feature film in '78. And then he directed the Michael Landon TV movie in 1983 titled Love is Forever, which would be his final directorial effort before passing away in 1993 at the age of 70. He did earn one Oscar nomination, though, in his career for a film he produced, did not direct it, but produced, called Navajo, which came out in 1952. And he was actually received the Best Documentary Oscar nomination for it, although it's really a docudrama. But again, kind of speaking to his socially conscious approach, it's a film that deals more progressively with the plight of the Native Americans, and specifically centers on a young Navajo boy. So there you have it. Changes, 1969. If you get a chance to check it out, if you don't mind the rough quality on YouTube, and fortunately you will be missing out on a lot of the very key songs, you can check it out there, or you could drop a C note and pick up that DVD off eBay. But again, this is kind of my takeaway was a lot like Daisy Kenyon, in that worth checking out. But yes, it is flawed. It is uneven, but still worth checking out, worth watching. And that's it for this episode of Carpet City Cinema. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Please continue to show us some love with those Facebook page likes and spreading the news about the podcast, which is available on iTunes and Spotify and YouTube as well. So thank you very much, and we'll be back next week.